And we are live. Hello, everyone. Hi, and welcome to this event for Tina Kane and Mahogany Browne for the launch of ALMA Presses play. I believe I'm echoing real fast. Am I echoing now? Okay. Tina, do you happen to have headphones?
What's that?
Do you happen to have headphones?
I do.
I'm echoing through your computer.
What's that?
I'm echoing through your computer.
Through mine? I don't have headphones on. Oh, no. No, I don't. So let me...
Tina, would you mind putting some on? Thank you. While Tina does that, I'm going to continue going over just like our introductions and a bit of that. So I'm Carter. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the event coordinator at Astoria Bookshop, the bookshop hosting this fantastic event. If you don't know who we are, because you found us through the magic of the internet, we are a bookshop in Astoria, Queens, in New York City. Before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping things. You will have the opportunity to ask questions during the last 15-ish minutes of this, maybe 10. We'll see what happens. If you have questions throughout, you can put them in the question function down at the bottom, and I will read them out during that time. You can also chat with one another in the chat on the right, but we will kick you out if you participate in any trolling, any racial, ethnic, or homophobic slurs. Basically, I am asking you all to be kind and respectful towards one another. And finally, there is a button down there at the bottom that offers the option to buy ALMA Presses Play. We have signed book plates available for this book, which is super cool. But we also, that button leads to the same link, leads to Chlorine Sky, which is by Mahogany Browne, who came in and actually signed copies the other day. So you can get 2 books that are signed right there in that button. You just got to click it. Let me see. Let me see if Tina's headphones are working. You good?
My headphones are working, yeah.
Perfect. Great. Okay, we're all good.
I love your headphones, Tina. It looks just like Alma's.
It kind of works. I know. It wasn't planned, but yeah.
Very on brand. So let me introduce both of these 2 authors. Tina Kane, who uses she, her pronouns, grew up in downtown New York City during the 70s and 80s, surrounded by artists and writers and musicians, and she draws much of her creative inspiration from that era. She is the founder and director of Writers in the Schools, Rhode Island, for which she works as a visiting poet. She currently serves as the Poet Laureate for Rhode Island, where she lives with her husband and 3 children. In 2020, Kane was named a Poet Laureate Fellow with the Academy of American Poets. Her books include The Fifth Thought, Dear Elena, Letters from Elena Ferrante, Once More with Feeling, and Body of Work. ALMA Presses Play is Tina's debut novel in verse for young adult readers. Mahogany Browne, who uses she, her pronouns, is the executive director of Just Media, a media literacy initiative designed to support the groundwork of criminal justice leaders and community members. This position is informed by her career as a writer, organizer, and educator. Browne has received fellowships from Agnes Gund, Air Serenity, Cave Canum, Poets House, Mellon Research, and Rauschenberg. She is the author of recent works including Chlorine Sky, as I mentioned before, Woke, A Young Poet's Call to Justice, Woke Baby, and Black Girl Magic. As the founder of the diverse lit initiative, Woke Baby Book Fair, Browne's latest project is a poetry collection responding to the impact of mass incarceration on women and children, and also it's out today. It's called I Remember Death by Its Proximity to What I Love. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. So welcome both of you. This is when everyone would clap if we were in person.
We'll make it like a radio-friendly block party version. Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you, Carter.
I am going to let these two take over.
Always good to see you. And I am so excited to be sitting with the birthday book queen of the day. Congratulations on ALMA Presses.
Thank
play,
you.
Tina.
Thank you. And thank
How
you
are you
for
feeling?
being here. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling nervous. It's interesting because you and I were talking in the green room where I was saying it's the writing of the book that's the thing for me. And so that part has been done, and then to go out and talk about it is a really different animal. And as a poet, you know, you don't get that many opportunities. It's a pretty solitary occupation. So,
Yeah.
But I feel good. I feel very proud and grateful. And there's a bunch of people I want to thank. And I'm going to do it now. Like Michelle Fry, my editor at Random House, and Joey Ho, my publicist, and Kathy Bobick, and all these other incredible people that are this huge team that work on the copy of the book, and they're unbelievable. They have this incredible talent, which is new to me, around content and words and context. Arlie Guzman, who's an assistant at Random House, and then also Yuta Onada, who made the beautiful cover of the book, and last but most, Christopher Myers, who is the creative mind behind this brilliant imprint, Make Me a World. And he brought me into the fold on this, and I'm so happy that he compelled me to write this book.
Such a good cast of dream catchers you have. Chris Myers for always, right?
Yeah.
And to assure that we don't get caught in the what feels like it could be mundanity for a writer who's used to writing the poem and then just reading the poem, right? I'm excited to hear pieces of ALMA throughout our questions. So if there is a poem that would fit the answer rather than you just answering it, please feel free. I mean, it is your day. You really can do whatever you want. All right. So let's start it off. How did you develop the idea for ALMA Presses play?
Well, it's interesting because Christopher and I had been on a panel several years ago about children's literature. And he approached me afterwards and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about writing a children's book? I've got this imprint that I'm starting." And initially I thought, no, I have 3 children and I've been reading to them every day of their lives. And I really respect that genre as being specialized and having, people have special talents in that genre that I didn't actually feel I had. So I thought, no, that's not my wheelhouse, and I don't have a lot of time to write, so I should probably stay in my lane, right? But then as a thank you gift, the person who organized the panel sent him one of my poetry books, Once More with Feeling, which is a really New York book. And he wrote me and he said, "Oh my God, this is the New York I know that we grew up in, and I really want this cityscape for young people, or this to capture this kind of gritty time that we're both familiar with." So I started thinking about it. We started talking and tossing around ideas. And I always say that when he said novel and verse, my ears pricked up because I was like, okay, that's getting closer to what I feel I could do. And then he asked me if I had ever read Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson. And that's one of my favorite books. So, and not a lot of people even know about it. So I was like, okay, I'm in. Like that, just the fact that you're even, now my book is nothing like that, but it brought me into the loop of like, this is a creative mind who really, and he has had my back creatively throughout, and that's been a real gift. So, yeah. So that was the initial impetus. Yeah.
I love this. And I agree. New York City has its own heartbeat, its own soundtrack. And I think you were able to embody that beautifully in the text. It's not common that we read about a Chinese Jewish main character. And I love seeing diversity in literature. What was your motivation or inspiration behind creating a character like ALMA?
Well, I mean, it's the old adage, write what you know. So, I'm half Chinese, and I grew up with a Jewish dad with grandparents in Brooklyn and grandparents in Chinatown. And I was 13 in 1982, and I was living on a sketchy block in the East Village. So that kind of, there are some autobiographical details that, overlap with my life. And so that was the general impetus to go with that type of character. And my own daughter's name is Alma, and she was 13 at the writing of this book. So that mindset and that period in life became really interesting to me. And that paired with the landscape that Chris was kind of wanting to share with the world, with young readers.
And how does she feel about being named, being the namesake?
I think she's happy about that. Now she says, "Oh no, now my name might get popular because people will know about it." Whereas before, it seemed, she's the only Alma around. So I said, "Don't worry, it's not going to get too popular."
I'm sure it will. She'll have other namesakes that come probably. Do you have a favorite character in the book? And if you do, can you share their introduction in the text?
Sure. Well, I mean, on some level, Alma is dearest to me because I really had to get into her head, and obviously I identified with some of the elements of that character. But actually, there are two boy characters because there's a crew of kids on this block, and they're loosely based on kids that were in a crew on my block when I was 13. And one of them, Dario, he kind of, he's a typical kid where he's singing this stupid song, Kung Fu Fighting, which was really popular at that time. Horrible song. And Clarissa, who's a Chinese girl on the block, and Alma, who's half Chinese, are hanging out, like braiding each other's hair. And he comes by on his bike and he starts singing like the lyrics to this stupid song, Kung Fu Fighting. And they say to him, like, "Don't you know that's racist?" And he says, how can that be racist? It's in the song. And they bust out laughing. And it's just one of those moments where he's kind of tone deaf and he doesn't really get it. And there was kind of breaking on him. But I feel like there's a moment where we get a little insight, or Alma kind of gets some insight into his situation as a person. So I'll read that. Candy is a big theme. I don't know if it's a theme, it's a motif in the book, because they're hanging out on a stoop all the time, eating candy. It's like a pastime. It's a miracle we have teeth. So there are these lists of candies, and they're always sharing candy. It's like a bonding activity. But this one is called Lemon Heads, which you may recall you could buy for like 10 cents a box. So Lemon Heads. We're leaning against the gate in front of Faith's place, eating snow cones, when we see something we've never seen before. It's hard to grasp at first, the way Dario looks drunk as he slow stumbles down our block, followed closely by his older brother, who keeps pushing the back of Dario's head as we watch from the other side of the street. Mouths open, red veins of cherry juice winding down our arms. Dario lurches forward so hard, he almost falls face first onto the pavement. That's when Miguel calls out, "Hey, yo, Christian, why you got to?" Before Miguel can finish his question, Christian whips around and sneers, then smacks the box of lemon heads fast from Dario's hand. We all watch the yellow candies bounce like beads around their feet and skitter across the sidewalk. A sound of teeth, but slow motion, as if the whole street is silent, except for Maria's soft crying, "Dios mío," under her breath. Faith puts on her headphones, but my gaze stays fixed on Christian. My whole body tense as Miguel's fists stay clenched until the brother reaches the corner, where Dario's eyes flash back at us from over his shoulder, as Christian gives his head a final shove. I see for the very first time that Dario has beautiful eyes, dark and wide, even when he's trying not to cry.
Mm. Mm. What a moment. I love how vulnerable you allow us to see someone who would otherwise be cast off as a bully. Like there are no
Right.
emotions there. Um, can you talk about why that was a determining factor for you to not just flatten the act that harms someone else, but to like give it some texture?
Well, I mean, it's just that understanding you come to in life that all behavior is some kind of communication, and that sometimes bad behavior comes from pain. You know. So, and there's this like other. It's funny. I have this little sweet spot for a couple of the boys. Miguel is a boy who's like a love interest of Alma's, but he's like, there's this one poem where he's calling her an overthinker. Like, why do you think so much? You're always analyzing things. And they kind of banter. And then she says, well, maybe you should think some more. And he says something like, yeah, I probably should, but I really think more than you know I do, you know. And so it's just these kind of small moments. And I think that was one of the challenges for me as a poet, to try and write a narrative, is that as a poet, I'm really interested in moments. And I kind of want to leave spaces in the book between action where it was really, I think I said this to Chris at one point, like writing the book was very cinematic to me because I was swimming in the pool, doing laps and kind of writing it in my head, but that it unfurled kind of like a Super 8 movie, scene by scene, kind of revealed itself to me. So the challenge was to kind of string these scenes together that told a story, but I didn't want the story to be too tight and kind of stay true to my loose poetry touch, you know. So
Loose poetry touch. This is why you are the queen of Rhode Island now. All right. Love it. Why did you decide to write a book based in the 1980s? And in what ways do you think the 80s New York coming of age story resonates with readers today?
Well, you know, it's funny because I was watching Stranger Things with my daughter, and there's a whole season where it's in the 80s. I was laughing, but it's like 80s mall culture, like suburban mall culture. So I really didn't relate, except for maybe through the movies, like Fast Times at Ridgemont High or something. Yes. But totally different 80s. But that really didn't influence me. It was more so that cityscape, because, you know, New York is very different. Certainly the block I grew up in is very different now than it was. I have this one poem where I'm like, you know, that parking lot was not always a dorm, right? So it was a really different scene. But I do think that children and everybody's always interested in time periods that they haven't lived in, and they're cyclically resurging into the consciousness for whatever reasons. Like there's one poem, Ronald Reagan, and I was kind of remembering how much I hated Ronald Reagan at the time. And the character, you know, she sees this picture up in the school and she just hates his guts. And, you know, so I think it's interesting because, you know, now that time is history. Like I'm getting older, and so that's really a historical period for different reasons. But I think that any time period, there are universal concerns that all young people have that never they change in terms of the outer elements of the time, but the core of people's concerns, like their friends and belonging somewhere, what's my place in the world, all of those things are omnipresent and universal and never end.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that nod at young people having the wherewithal to like grasp, is this going to, like, this is a historical moment and I am affected by it and I know I'll be affected later. So I love the nod at Ronald Reagan,
Right.
because we know what Reaganomics
Right.
resulted,
Yeah.
right? We know the symptoms of it and then the results
Yeah.
of it. And to
Yeah.
have that kind of crystallize in this YA book that does not feel necessarily like, oh, it's going to be political, but very much is like this character is already a global citizen.
Well, it's interesting because to me, she has this kind of like multiracial crew of friends, which totally mirrored the friends that I had. They really are based on old friends of mine growing up. But more so because New York really was like, or at least my block really was like a complete melting pot. But like on my block and in the book, there's a bunch of characters, but one of the poorest character, the child living in abject poverty, is a white kid. And there's also a girl who's going to private school. And then there's, a bunch of other kids. But I was really interested in kind of nodding to class issues, and not just issues around ethnic or racial identity. Because I think those are also things that kids, or certainly I was growing up, was really conscious of: class differences and access and the inequities of that, which are often much more subtle but very deeply felt.
Mm-hmm.
They're not as obvious, but kids know. They don't understand necessarily Reaganomics or what that's going to mean. But actually, my kids are very savvy now, and like the times they're living in now, they absolutely know what historical. We don't know exactly how it's going to pan out, but the political consciousness is already awakened for sure.
Yeah. And it's in the music too, right? Which you have laced all through this text. Music played a big role. Bowie, Blondie, AC/DC, The Clash. Are these your personal favorites for when it comes to music? And who did you listen to while writing Alma?
Okay, so I listened to all those, not so much AC/DC. That's like on the radio, and I'll read that part actually. But definitely The Clash, all of those bands, David Bowie, a huge hero of mine. And I was joking with one of my kids the other day, like I'm stuck in 1984, I just can't get past it. But now I've always listened to a lot of disco, but I'm forever listening to disco. It's like usually what's going on right now. So, but I'll actually read.
Yes.
There is a scene with Alma's great grandmother who lives in Chinatown with her grandparents, and it has to do with AC/DC. So, okay. All right. This is called Back in Black. All I can find is a red Coca-Cola t-shirt, but to enter great-grandmother's room and offer her the customary plate of oranges, I must change. Our whole relationship is based on this. Me wearing red for good luck, her smiling and nodding, us presenting each other food. Great-grandmother usually has sweets already laid out for me. A plate piled high with black bean cakes, egg tarts, and almond roca, which is a fancy kind of American chocolate that only Chinese people seem to eat. Great-grandmother is tiny and beautiful, with the face of an old woman and the eyes of a young girl. She parts her black-gray hair with 2 bobby pins so that it frames her features at the chin. Wears a brown silk jacket and slippers, no matter where she is going or where she is, which is mostly home. She hasn't left Chinatown since 1974, when my grandmother took her to Macy's for a winter coat she never wore. Lately, great-grandmother has grown so frail that when she wants to leave the apartment, grandfather has to carry her down 3 flights of stairs to the entrance of the building where she's content to spend her time in a folding chair watching the people pass by. When she offers me a bean cake, I take it with both hands, bow slightly, then we sit and smile at each other for a while, with genuine affection, but in silence, since she doesn't speak English and I barely speak Chinese. Back in Black by AC/DC is playing on the radio that great-grandmother always has on in the other room. Nodding her head, she softly hums the tune. Good song, I say, holding up my thumb. She gives me a thumbs up back, and we laugh.
So beautiful, so well written. I love the grandmother as an intersection for where you come from, but also the fact that she likes ACDC. Shout out to that moment. Like, you can't
A point
leave
of
grandma
connection.
behind. Yep, absolutely, so good.
Well, music, there's a language barrier, but
Mhm.
language of music,
But the music bridges us all. It brings us all together.
Yeah.
You may know the lyrics, but the other person catches the rhythm, and that
Yep.
too is enough.
Yep.
That's a language and connection in itself.
Yeah.
You talk about mental kung fu and mantras in the book. Do you have one that you follow or live by that you'd like to share with us today?
I don't really have a mantra. Although I know my friend Ann is one.
Hi, Anne.
Is dying. It's not that big a deal.
Say that again. So
she doesn't
you
know
in the
that,
back.
but I think about that all the time because, one thing I was thinking about this today because I was writing some remarks for something I have to talk about tomorrow, but about radical acceptance. And during the pandemic, I would walk in the woods every day or take a long walk and try and just get out. And it was the early part of the pandemic was kind of freakish because we're like, what the hell are we dealing with here? And so I really started focusing on the idea of radical acceptance, like as a way to deal with uncertainty, like just whatever comes, we will deal, and that's actually, I think Unitong Gleason Martin, that's actually something he and I talked about, which was just also radical empathy, but I think they're connected actually. So I don't have a mantra per se. I think like my mental kung fu is swimming in a pool, just laps. It's like moving meditation. But I guess if I had one, it'd be like, if no one's dying, like, it's all right. That's a big deal.
Yeah. And tomorrow occurs and you'll have a chance to get it right the next time.
Yeah.
I like that. Let me think. Do I have a meditation? I don't know. I have a meditation for myself, but when I think of my characters, I think like you in the sense that they're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're still trying to figure it out. Yeah. And so maybe keep on would be the mantra.
Yeah. Press on.
Press play.
Press on. Yes.
Do you have a favorite poem from the book?
I don't. It's funny. Okay,
I'm going to push you a little bit harder. I don't want favorite poem. What was the most difficult part to write in the book? And if you could share that piece, and then after you share it, tell us why.
Okay.
I will call an audible, child. Shout out to everyone sitting here watching this. They've given me some beautiful questions.
Oh, great.
And then I'm just like, but I want to talk to Tina too. So switch.
All right. I actually have never read this out loud, so let's see. Okay, so on the block where Alma lives with her friends. There's an apartment building, and they find out that a young waitress who lives in the building had been raped in the hallway of the apartment building. And that's very scary for them. But throughout the book, there's a lot of Greek mythology woven in, because Alma is in 8th grade and she's reading Edith Hamilton's mythology book, which is actually, I read in 8th grade too. And so, her whole thing is, she is just looking around and taking information from every aspect of her life. People on her block. She goes to school in the West Village, which is a much tonier, nicer part of town, and what's going on over there and the disparities. And so this poem, The Waitress and the Swan, is Alma connecting the myth of Leda and the swan, where Zeus rapes the swan. And she's connecting it to the story of what happened to the girl on her block. So this was tough to write because, and there was other parts of the book that they weren't tough for me to write, but I was really trying to hit the right tone in terms of delicacy and respecting young people's vulnerability of mind, but the realities, that they're aware of. So The Waitress and the Swan. So forgive me if I stumble. I've never read this aloud. Still like myself when I was writing it. So, The Waitress and the Swan. Sitting on the stoop with my headphones on, but no music in my ears, I can hear my own breathing more clearly. Even though our block is kind of noisy mid-morning, with a delivery truck parked on the corner, unloading a pallet of washing machine parts in front of the laundromat. I'm watching Clarissa roller skate in circles until her mom says she can cross the street to hang out with me, when a station wagon pulls up to the entrance of her building. It's brown like the one they had on the Brady Bunch and about as old. We'd been told that the waitress on the 4th floor is set to move out. So when I see a young man at the wheel with the same long reddish hair, I think he must be her brother, come to take his sister home. She appears in the doorway, hoisting a large army duffel, looking pale in the harsh light of this overcast morning. Her posture straight as a ballerina's, even saddled with a heavy load, making me think of Swan Lake, which is a ballet that I have heard of but never seen, and reminds me of the myth, Leda and the Swan, where Zeus turns himself into a bird so he can have sex with a mortal woman named Leda. Why she would want to be with a swan makes no sense to me, but I didn't raise my hand in class to ask in case there was something about the sex I was missing. Plus, the painting Miss Foster showed us didn't help me understand any better why it's okay for a man, just because he's a god disguised as a swan, to get on top of Leda when she looks as shy or asleep as she does in the painting. I'm watching the waitress hug her brother, their red hair blending together on their shoulders. Even from across the street, I can see the tenderness between them. I want to tell the girl in my class who said, at least Leda gave birth to Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. That beauty means nothing if it comes from something ugly. That the Greeks blamed Helen's beauty for the Trojan War, but Paris and Agamemnon just used Helen as an excuse to do what they wanted, that they would have found a reason to fight anyway.
They would have found a reason to fight anyway. I think you met the assignment, right? How do we have these really difficult conversations with young people without patronizing them? They are aware. Most of them are in these conversations already, and it's less about articulation and more about that radical empathy that you're talking about. So how do you offer that branch for some kind of healing? So thank you for that so much. And if that's the most difficult part of writing, Alma, and your first time sharing it, what was the most fun or revolutionary? What was the most revolutionary moment in writing Alma, and is there a piece attached to that?
Well, I think in a way, the revolutionary part, in some ways, it's a book about identity, like about a girl who is, halfway between a lot of different worlds. She's also a Gemini, so there's these dualities in her life in a concrete way, and then culturally, East and West Village, Brooklyn, Manhattan. But I think the revolutionary part of it, if there is one, could be that ultimately what I want young readers to take away from the book is that, there are so many things in the world competing to define us, whether it's our skin color, the language we speak, where we live, our zip code, what kind of music we like, how tall we are, what kind of food we eat, what kind of job we do. And even within our own families, like Alma's family, she doesn't quite feel like she fits in even to her own family sometimes. And people often feel that, not even just because they're biracial, but maybe because they're just different from their family members. So there's all these things competing to define us. And we can't spend our lives, ultimately, we can't spend our lives answering to them. We have to actively choose the elements of our lives and our stories that we want to bring into the fold. So like ALMA PRESSES play, we were kind of throwing around lots of different titles, and ultimately there was this question about Alma being passive or being active at one point. And I thought, Alma's a thinker, and I don't think of thinking as a passive activity. I think thinking is quite active. And her pressing play is her kind of coming to what is a small decision in the larger context of the world, but kind of a big decision within her life, of her kind of deciding to decide who she wants to be and which elements ultimately will define her.
It feels like it's a moment of synthesization where one ignites the other. And so the thinking is, critical thinking. So many of us have not done it.
Yeah.
Shout out to Congress.
Right.
So this is an action item. Are you thinking it through? Have you looked and considered all the variables? And what if the variables are not just this one moment, but the people that are affected in the ripple?
Absolutely. And I think that revolutions can be emotional and political, but I also think that, and I believe this in terms of what our country has been going through, that personal issues can get played out politically, and that unresolved personal issues play themselves out in policy or on the national stage in terms of in harmful ways that can really affect people's lives.
Yes.
So, but in terms of the fun part, it was a trip to try and go back and really try and access a mindset of a younger self. And I started listening to my kids really carefully. Like, what are they interested in? And, their whole world is so different. Like, I was like laughing, like, look, if I wanted to see a friend, I'd have to like bike over to their house and like yell up to stairs. And if they weren't home, maybe I could leave a message on the answering machine if they had an answering machine. And, now you just have access to your people just within seconds. So it's a very different world. But when I was listening to them as I was trying to kind of collect information for this book, like I said, there are universal concerns that just never go away about being young. So that was fun.
I like that. I agree.
And I mean, you know
YA
this,
as
like
an adult
Chlorine Sky. I
be.
think I texted you about this. It really spoke to me. Even just the things about hair, like in Alma's book, like they're braiding each other's hair. There's certain things that are just like archetypally universal to young people. There's some uncomfortable feelings your character in Chlorine Sky has when she's like floating in the pool and the weightlessness. And I mean, I just felt that so viscerally when I was reading it, because I remembered like being on the bus one day and just feeling like so unwieldy and so burdened by just a changing body and a changing mind. And those things don't change no matter whether kids have iPhones or Walkman. Timeless.
They feel like an heirloom, like a little time capsule.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every generation has their starter pack.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
What poet, writer, or artist was formative for you growing up, and has, I guess, pushed you towards your journey of becoming a poet now?
Well, you know, I actually feel like I'm still always forming and I'm still always learning. So, I mean, there were early influences. Like I did a lot of study in French literature. So Marguerite Duras was a huge influence when I was a teenager. And she wrote this very spare kind of, it was called the new novel. She wrote this very spare style that I really admired. It was new and different. She had these kind of female characters that were sort of disjointed and brilliant and violent, and that was very interesting to me. So she was an interesting early influence. But I mean, I read a ton as a young person, and I still do, and I still feel like I'm always collecting. Like Thomas Hardy, I loved. Like Tess of the D'Urbervilles, like just a favorite book of mine. But like Sylvia Plath, I just finished this huge biography of her, and I didn't realize until I read it that she had this huge influence on me in terms of sound, and just ballsiness, you know. But I'm like, even now, like Sheila Maldonado, I don't know, she might be here tonight, but I read her stuff and I was like, who is this person? I'm still learning from everybody. Tongo Eisen Martin, when I discovered him a few years ago, I was, you know, I just gravitated towards that work. So I can't even remember who like Robert Lowell of all people. It's like a blue blood, you know, like, you know, Lowell family from Boston, but just brilliant poet. Sharon Olds when I was like 20. So there's like a million people. Camille Guthrie, I really love her new work. I just love it. So it's all over the place and ever present. I'm always collecting.
Mm-hmm. You have some good names there. That's a great reading list, everyone. As you're buying a book that has a signed book plate, you also can go ahead and drop in that cart a couple of these, you know, poets that Tina mentioned.
And you have a book that came out today.
Yes.
What's the title of that book?
I Remember Death by Its Proximity to What I Love. It is a book-length poem, and it's investigating the impact of mass incarceration on women and children, specifically me growing up, and just looking around, learning how I deal with men, learning how I play spades and dominoes, looking at the way the mass incarceration system has affected, I was going to say infected, but both are true, my family life, right? And the fracturing that you're always trying to mend thereafter.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for asking. But this is about you.
No. It's exciting.
For my last question, because we got to get to, you have some questions waiting, and I know Carter's going to come back and join us. You're the founder of Writers in Residence in Rhode Island, and you're a teaching poet. Who and what book would you recommend young people to read if they wanted to start reading poetry?
It's hard to say because I wouldn't want to dictate, because there really is so much work out there that literally there is some poet for everyone. What I will say, though, is that it only occurred to me really recently that, I mean, actually in writing this book, that the novel in verse, it's sort of like a gateway drug to poetry. like if you're a kid who's learning about fiction and nonfiction and prose in school, and maybe not so much about poetry, a novel in verse is actually this incredible way to transition into poetic thinking and being more comfortable with the form, because it's sort of loosely, or trying to unfold a story, but in poems. And I actually had only read one YA novel in verse, and it was Jacqueline Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming several years ago, before I was, this was on my horizon with my daughter. I read it to her when she was going to bed, and that book really hit me because it was so beautiful, but I had really only known about epic poems, like maybe like Onegin by Pushkin, which I love, or like the Odyssey or something. But I feel like novel in verse is a really good form for young people to get into, and then move towards, they'll be able to find from there. Once you're open to branching out, you just go on the internet, like it's all there, like just there isn't a specific person, because I wouldn't want to pigeonhole.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because there's Carter and the dog.
Yes.
I think novels in verse are excellent for young people as well. Not only are you introducing them to sound and rhythm and the boundarylessness,
right,
the ever-ending questions, but not necessarily we don't have to have the answers, right? We really just have to have the discussion and the observation.
Yeah, and the way that it unfolds is really different than prose, or it can be,
Yes. So. Thank you so much.
All right, Carter. These are great questions. Thank you.
Double Dutch. Now it's you.
All right. Actually, there is a question that very much relates to what you two were just talking about. Casey just asked for both of you, what is the hardest part of writing a novel in verse?
Mm-hmm. Great question.
I kind of spoke to that, so Mahogany, why don't you?
Mm-hmm. I would say that the hardest part for me was realizing that writing a poem or collection of poetry is not the same thing as writing a novel in verse. Yeah. When you write a collection of poetry, the arc, it can happen between the lines, in the white space. It can happen in the chapter change. Yeah. You can allow the reader to involve themselves with the historical text, right? The emotional text. Whereas the novel in verse, you have to do a little more legwork. You have to assure that I have, said the thing, and that here is, the linchpin to get you to the next discussion point, not just hope that you arrive to the conversation that we're having. So there is more framework, and then you can write in verse, definitely more articles.
Right, yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah, I have moments where I was like, oh, that's going to be fine. And then I received the gallon. I was like, nope, that's not, nope. This requires me to read it to you,
Yeah.
And novels in verse have to, they have to have a voice of their own. And it can't just live because I'm speaking it. It has to live within the text.
Yeah, on the page. Yeah, definitely more so, for sure.
Perfect. All right. Allie asked, what advice would you give to an aspiring poet? And I'm going to let both of you answer that. So,
I would just say read, and write, and find and build community. And I didn't study writing poetry. I studied literature, but more as a student of literature. So I didn't really take creative writing classes ever. But books were my teachers, and they were great teachers. And so I think reading and also seeking out work that's really different from yours to kind of disrupt your expectations and get you out of your own rhythms and comfort zones. And I think that's a continual process. Like I'm still always trying to do that. But I also think that community is really important. And that's something that, because I didn't study writing poetry, like in an MFA program, which I always thought gave an instant community. I was wondered, what's that like? I kind of write in a vacuum, in obscurity on my own. But I think that my position as poet laureate has taught me that community is really important around the work, and that writing is a very solitary, and it must be a solitary occupation unless you're collaborating. But that ultimately there's so much to be gotten from just being in touch with other people, and like exchanges of energy and work sometimes is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. I agree wholeheartedly. As a young person, I would say read, share, write.
Yeah.
Obviously not in that order, but alphabetically for sure. Oh, Pup agrees. Look at that. That was a high five.
Levy agreed.
Yep.
And
high five. Thanks.
And also, don't be worried about publishing. I mean, publishing is great, but worry about the work and worry about sharing it with people who you respect and care about. And it's not a sure thing that the publishing will follow, but the ultimate goal is to make the work and have it be appreciated by people who you respect. And sometimes that involves publishing and sometimes it doesn't. And none of those things, like I'm working on something right now, a new YA novel in verse that has to do with Emily Dickinson and a young Chinese girl. And, you know, there's a poet whose work was largely unknown and undiscovered, and it didn't stop her from creating thousands of poems. And so I always used to say, like, if someone told me no one is ever going to read a single poem you write, I'd still be writing poems because it's just the way I operate. And if you write from that point of view, it's a little bit harder to be disappointed, you know, then you're not kind of chasing something for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
But it's the work, you know, it's the work.
It has to be the work. If it's publishing, then it's just like someone who became a poet because they wanted to be famous.
Yeah. And the reality is, like, poets don't get famous.
Well, they do.
Well,
they do get famous. I'm going to push back on that because we have plenty. We have, everyone from Jackie Woodson to Sanchez to now we have the Amanda Gorman. Right.
Oh, I know. This is true. This is true.
We are not stuck in a bubble. Yeah. But we have to be mindful that we don't follow the light, like the fame light.
Sure.
That's what ruins the word. That's what ruins the work. You're always going to be working from a place where you are formulaic. You're trying to figure out how to win, trying to figure out how to be published, rather than trying to figure out what your voice is, who you are, and who you are trying to save with the work. Are you trying to save yourself? Are you trying to save your community? It has to be more than, you know, this carrot at the end of the stick.
Sure. Absolutely. And I guess there are poets that get famous, but, like, let's face it, most don't. It's really the love of the work. And that is, you know, and I think that pratfall is true for every form of art, whether you're a novel writer or, you know, whatever you do, a painter. There's always that sort of risk of placating an audience rather than reaching out into new areas.
All right, moving on to our last question. Joey, your wonderful publicist, just asked for both of you, what projects are you working on next?
Go ahead, Mahogany. You've got some good stuff coming up.
Well, Vinyl Moon drops in January. It is my second YA novel. It is not only in verse, it is a hybrid. So we have verse, we have text message, we have snail mail, we have recipes, we have prose. And I'm excited about it. It very much is in step with, I think, ALMA in the way it uses music as a soundtrack to discovering New York City and to discovering yourself. So that would be what's on deck next, Vinyl Moon. And it is in the Chlorine Sky universe. So if you read Chlorine Sky, then you will find someone that has already appeared has their own story.
Oh, well, that's great. Okay, that's good. Yes, a sequel.
Which, on the topic, you should read Chlorine Sky, just my personal opinion. And you can get it in that link down below. Yeah. Okay. Tina, what about you?
Well, so I have a poetry collection coming out in spring 2022 called Year of the Murder Hornet with my press release books. And then I'm doing research and reading now for a new YA novel in verse that I'm going to write, which is, I think it's going to be about a 12-year-old Chinese adoptee named Emily who lives with her American family in New York. And she discovers the work of Emily Dickinson and kind of develops a relationship with the work and with the poet as a way to navigate some of the trials that she's going through as a Chinese girl living with a Caucasian family, being adopted, feeling somewhat outcast in her school community, which is predominantly Chinese, and the kind of timelessness or the timeless relationship that one can develop with literature as a way to understand oneself and understand one's experience, even with, a dead poet from Amherst who, on the face of things, has nothing in common with your life. So I'm just thinking about all those attendant questions and trying to work on that.
I think that sounds fantastic. I can't wait for it.
Same. Book club.
Yes, let's have a book club here. Let's go. All right. So to wrap up, why don't you two tell us where we can find you on the internet?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I'm Mo Browne everywhere.
You're Mo Browne everywhere.
Yep. Every single place you can find a platform, you will find me. Name written just like that.
Mo Browne. Okay. I have a website, tinakane.ink, tinakane.inc. I'm not on Twitter. I'm kind of on Facebook. I do some Poet Laureate business there. And I am on Instagram, Tina L. Kane, I think is my handle. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you everyone. And thank you everyone for watching. Just kind of a wrap up about our upcoming events. Tomorrow we have an event with Monica Byrne for The Actual Star that came out today. And then next week we have a middle grade event with Marco Shiro and Zoraida Cordova about The Insiders, which is Marco Shiro's first middle grade debut. So all of that's really exciting coming up, and you can find it on our website. Don't forget to buy ALMA Presses Play down there in that link down at the bottom, as well as Chlorine Sky. And that's it. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.
All right. We will end this if I can press that.
Thank you.
Thank you. It will load. One day it'll load. Yes, stop.